Okay, we'll have the panel introduce themselves real quickly, and then we'll jump into the meat of it.
So I'm Joseph Williams. I'm the State of Washington Policy Advisor on blockchain, if you will.
And I'm Dan Friedberg. I work at Fenwick and West in the regulatory area and blockchain, so a law firm.
This a little closer. And I'm Marshall Greenwald with Craypay, and we're in the middle of our first round of pre-sale, so this is all very relevant. I'm interested in the feedback from these two gentlemen.
Excellent. Well, let's just jump right into it. So regulation. So what's the sentiment around regulation 2017 versus 2018? Joseph, you want to start us off?
Well, so there's 4 state agencies that pay attention to regulations, and I'll just articulate each of them. Department of Revenue cares about the B&O tax attached to crypto mining. So that's one. Department of Financial Institutions cares about securities registration and what happens with tokens and all of that. The Department of Commerce, which is what I primarily represent, cares about blockchain and the industry sector and in terms of its health, and I also work with smart contracts and things like that. And the Attorney General now has a special unit which is looking at fraud, and he's got 3 attorneys and 3 investigators attached to crypto fraud. And they're very aggressively pursuing that. So, to answer your question, in 2017, we had no agencies except for DFI looking at this. And so, a year later, we now have 4. So, it's gotten a great deal of attention. The Lieutenant Governor is a big speaker now on blockchain, as are a couple of state senators. So, it's on everybody's radar screen.
So, I guess my follow-up question across the board, is that a good thing? So, if you could just add that onto your... Dan will.
Yes, definitely. I think it's I don't know if this one's live,
Go
but yes, definitely. I think it's a good thing. So when we started in this space, and it wasn't that long ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I remember for the first couple of years, we didn't know whether Bitcoin was legal. And, I represented one of the largest holders in coin and the largest transactor of transactions on the blockchain at that time, Satoshi Dice, and we couldn't get an answer out of the regulators as to whether the coin transactions were legal. We certainly tried. I called the SEC and I called FinCEN many times and explained to them how the blockchain worked. But it really took about those first 3 years were gray, and it wasn't good for the industry. It really cast a cloud over it. There weren't any established companies in it because of this regulatory risk. There was a huge profit potential, though. At that time when I started, Bitcoin was trading at about 10 cents. So we've seen, and that initial period with regulatory uncertainty, allowed a huge profit for those people who took that risk. But overall, it's very positive. I mean, our state is a great state, Washington, in this area. The regulators are very cooperative. And I know that it sounds scary that the AG has tasked people on this, but this is a positive thing. The people that the AG is going after are bad actors. These are not people who are in the gray area and doing their best to comply. So this is, the people that Washington is targeting are people who took advantage of consumers. I think our state is really fair. I think their process is good. And so I think actually our state is one of the best, and they're actually, very pro-industry.
So
overall,
one of the earlier panels talked about the ICO panel was a little glim. Like, I haven't seen that much kind of depression. I know it's Seattle and it's kind of a gray day, but I mean, it's not the 90s. It's not alternative rock. I mean, is there opportunity to do an ICO in the Seattle area? Is it a good or bad that that are the entrepreneurs in your backyard or kind of remind me of the grunge singers? Is that a good thing, bad thing? Comments on that?
Well, we've had this dip in the price of Ether, and I know that there's sort of been this dramatic commentary, that it's the end of the world. But, for people who have been in this space for years, this is nothing. I mean, the prices are extraordinarily stable. I mean, there was a time when, the price of crypto went up 10 times in a day. Okay, so seeing the prices go down 50% might be healthy. We haven't seen the end of ICOs. I do think you have to look at the character of the token being offered, in that some of these are securities, some are utilities, and I think that we're going to see some healthy maybe rationality in the market. But ICOs are not dead. They're going to continue. And I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, and Marshall's coming from the standpoint of an entrepreneur. So, like, where do you stand on all this?
Yeah, it's interesting because states are stepping up and saying we need to regulate this. We need to look at this more closely. I think some of the kind of despair that we sense in the ICO world from a founder's perspective comes from the fact there hasn't been sweeping regulation on a federal level to tell founders who are trying to do the right things and comply both with state laws, federal laws, and then international laws. How do you actually go about doing this, and how do you handle, from the inception to running a successful company long term, and how do you manage all these elements that are kind of conflicting with the current regulatory landscape? We have this structure that the SEC has come out and said it already is there, right, essentially. And that's true. However, what we've developed as a technology doesn't fit into what's there. And so there is a need for regulation. Now, you asked if it's a good or bad thing. It can have unintended consequences. So I think we need to be careful and very thoughtful in how we work with regulators towards that end.
So I'm going to throw this out just based on kind of what you're saying. Howey test always existed, never didn't exist. But it seemed like when blockchain came on the field, like suddenly all the rules were out of the, because like if you're doing an ICO or it's a blockchain project, it's cryptocurrency, suddenly everything that used to apply to a startup no longer applied last summer. Agree, disagree?
Certainly that's not the perspective of the regulators, right? That has always applied. I think many people tried to circumvent or tried to take something that didn't fit so cleanly into that model and say, what can I do with this? And I think some of them took a more aggressive approach, a little bit skirting some of the things that were there without discussion with regulators. I think that at least at the SEC, I don't know about the other agencies, have been pretty open to say, hey, we're open to these dialogues and come talk to us about these issues because we recognize there is some there. But by and large, I don't think anything actually changed. I think the Howey test should always have been looked at. I think that the elements of how your project is being funded should always have been looked at.
So I've been facilitating these conversations over the last 2 years, and it kind of went to, at the end of even last year, we'd get to the end of the panel, and there'd be a question, or I'd ask the question, so do you think someone's going to go to jail? And people would go, rah, ICOs, it's the best thing ever, or blockchain, whatever. And then we'd ask them, do you think people are going to go to jail? And they go, oh yeah, of course.
I am purchasing D&O insurance and a I can't remember what it's called, a DIC policy that kicks in just in case it is inordinately expensive to defend myself. But I am trying to do everything by the book. That is something we weighed very carefully as a very conservative founding group with an attorney as one of our co-founders. We took a long time, so we're a little bit late getting into the space from the standpoint of raising money, but I think it's a safer environment for us as well.
Let's bring it back to Joseph. So what are the opportunities for an entrepreneur or just anybody in this space, in particular in Washington State? What are the opportunities and challenges that are unique to Washington State?
So we're unique in a lot of ways. One of the things is we have a governor and a government that's very interested in energy and ecology. We're seeing some very interesting blockchain startups that are dealing with carbon encapsulation and things like that. Is that the right term, encapsulation? Whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the advent of tokens related to energy trading and things like that. So a lot of what Enron wanted to do, but they did it fraudulently back in the day, may be achievable through tokens today. And that's all very interesting to the state. The other thing is we have a lot of very entrepreneurial, we have a weird state for the way we fund infrastructure. We do it through utility districts and things like that. And a lot of utility districts are looking at token sales as a way to actually get out of the municipal bond market, which is a painfully expensive market. And so if I were doing a startup, which I'm not, but if I were, these are the kinds of opportunities I would take a look at. There's a lot of political will behind these kinds of investments.
Okay, let's see. Dan, so from a legal standpoint, what's your advice on the current regulatory standpoint for your potential clients or anybody entering this space? Like, what's the takeaway they should get?
Yes, our perspective really hasn't changed too much over the past few years. We always, sort of counseled clients before the token was functional to sell it in accordance with securities laws. So we really haven't seen, there's really been nothing that's been a big surprise. I do anticipate that we are going to see interventions, within the next 6 months to a year from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is, so that's a division of the Department of Treasury, and they regulate virtual currency on the federal level. Essentially, if you're an administrator or a creator of a virtual currency and that currency isn't considered decentralized, there's a registration requirement on the federal level. That's an area that's been ignored by a lot of practitioners, which is unfortunate. It's actually, there's a parallel here with the securities. We saw, and this is not the fault of the industry, and I feel really bad about the bar, frankly, not stepping up to inform people. But essentially, there was this period where securities laws were ignored. And I think we're basically over that, though I'm still seeing some clients come in that have been improperly counseled. But we still have this issue with FinCEN that is not aware. What's happened is there are a lot of lawyers who are securities lawyers and corporate lawyers who haven't really taken into account the particulars of virtual currency regulation. So I think that's something that we're going to see a lot more of is FinCEN stepping up and noting that some of these issuers of virtual currencies are administrators, and they have to register with FinCEN. A consequence of that registration is that all the states are alerted of that, and there's a corollary licensure on the state level, which is money transmission. So I think that's something that we're going to see is other agencies step up. But overall, I feel that we're still in this period where there's going to be increased regulation, but it's positive and healthy. We're still on the growth curve. I know that in this temporary period, there's a lot of concerns about it, but I think in the big picture, we sort of correlated a bit to the internet. So we're, a tech firm. We just represent tech companies. And in the internet bubble, people would come up to me and say, is the internet for real? And the answer is did you try it? Of course
We
it's
laughed
for real.
about that today, but the idea of doing a credit card transaction on the internet was a ridiculous idea.
That's right.
And not too long ago, maybe
Yes.
20-ish years ago, if that. So all these things are, they're evolutions, right? So, I mean, it's all crazy. Like even Airbnbs, Uber, those are really, really bad ideas until suddenly they're not.
That's exactly right.
I actually have a follow-up question for you. You're talking about FinCEN, which is a totally, separate agency, doesn't necessarily share the same opinions and purview as other agencies. So is there a risk that somebody will go through and develop a technology-based token and that FinCEN could say this is a currency, you need to register. The SEC says this is a security, you need to register. And the IRS says this is an asset and you need to have it on your books and pay taxes on your gains. Isn't there a risk that you're going to be overregulated as a developer of this technology?
Joseph, do you also want to weigh in on that one?
Well, we struggle with this at the state level. So if it's a security, there's no B&O tax attached to it. If it's a utility token, we think there's a B&O tax that gets attached to it. We think there's a B&O tax that's attached to crypto mining. The problem is there's no legal precedent. There's no statute. There's nothing. And so the agencies, and Dan, you're probably very familiar with this, are kind of winging it. And it's worse at the federal level. So my guess is, they're going to they got to watch it from all angles.
Completely agree. Yeah, if you look at the concerns of each of these agencies, they're different. So FinCEN is mainly concerned with money laundering, and that's not something that the SEC focuses on. So absolutely, you could be in the situation that you have something that's a virtual currency for FinCEN purposes, but is still a security for SEC purposes, and is property for IRS purposes. So they're all different tests.
So what's the solution? Go talk to every state and federal regulator and get an opinion letter from them?
Well, no, none of these agencies are giving opinion letters. So no, essentially, it's just an understanding of what the laws require, and taking a reasonable position. And in the case of FinCEN, really the opening that they've left is this decentralized currency concept. So with Bitcoin, so this was something that really worried us in Bitcoin, is that FinCEN was actually going to require the Bitcoin Foundation to register as a money service business. And they came out with a ruling that essentially gave a loophole for decentralized currencies. So most of the approach at this point with FinCEN is really to make sure that your currency is structured as decentralized rather than as controlled by one administrator. And that's the reason that you see many currencies being issued by nonprofits and foundations. It's very difficult, potentially impossible, to issue a currency from a company and have it decentralized. And the reason is by the nature of the corporate rules, that company's decision makers, that is the shareholders and the board, do have the ability to set the rules on the currency.
So I apologize. We do not have the sufficient amount of time to dive into this, but I want to make sure that I give you guys a closing remark, something that you think that the audience should absolutely know about this space from your point of view, kind of the words of wisdom, what's must know about regulation, and also I'm hoping you three gentlemen will be around for lunch. So please come find these guys and ask the deeper questions. So we'll start with you, Joseph. What are the must knows from the regulatory standpoint from your point of view?
So this is an easy one. You must seek competent legal counsel. So Dan's point is right. There's no agency that will issue you a letter saying, we approve of this, and we're seeing instruments that are really odd and are beyond our understanding. So you must seek legal counsel. I do think, and Dan could talk more to this, but I don't think a law firm's E&O insurance is going to cover a misinterpretation of rules that are in play anyway. So there's a lot of uncertainty, which is the other thing we need investment certainty. So we need regulations, and we need to do more things. And so if you want to be proactive, engage with your elected officials. You have 2 congresspeople who are part of the blockchain caucus. You have Senator Kilmer and the guy down in Thurston County, Denny Heck, Congressman Kilmer, Congressman Heck. So you have people who are interested in this issue and trying to resolve.
And I just want to especially call you on. Thank you for being part of this panel. We've tried to do this panel in many different events, especially DC. It was impossible to get people signed off, to get them on stage. No one will make it public. So thank you for that. We really, really appreciate that.
I didn't tell anybody I was.
Well, that's how you get. That's how you get stuff done. Dan, final words.
Yeah, no, I think that's. Those are good comments. Essentially, the issuance of a currency, it's a regulated financial activity, and the consequences for violation are serious. So, being cognizant of the laws and trying will put you way ahead of most. And we haven't seen any enforcement action against companies that are truly trying to comply. So I feel like the regulation is difficult, but it's not by any means a stop sign.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for the audience. Everyone here that's involved in a project that's developing something that falls under any of the regulations that we're talking about, raise your hands. It's a pretty good number. So I guess my advice is first seek to understand. So that's where the legal competent counsel comes in. Come talk to this gentleman here after, and find the right fit for your project. I think the second thing is once you understand and you see in your project how there are problems with the current regulatory landscape or insufficient direction, then find your voice. Find somebody or yourself. Go out and seek opportunities to talk to everybody involved, whether that's a chamber of commerce or elected officials or attorneys who can give you access to them. I think it's really important that those of us who are involved in this technology at the early stages are vocal about the need for regulation.
Excellent. Well, let's give a round of applause for our panel here.